Hello friends, Charmaine here and welcome to another paper making video. Let me walk you through the process of making handmade paper using recycled scraps that I made extra special by adding dried tulip petals and gold foil. In this video, I will show you all the materials that I used and some tips and tricks along the way that you can refer back to if you're planning to make handmade paper yourself. So let's get started first and foremost with the most important tool in paper making, which is a mold and deckle. So it's essentially the tool that is a screen and the frame, and you use it to catch the pulp when you're making paper. I got this one from Temu. It's a bit flimsy and I have a couple of issues with it, which I'll discuss further. So the mold and deckle are connected by a hinge, which felt off. As you can see, it's more difficult to maneuver. I made an executive decision to remove the hinge. When I moved here to the UK, I actually forgot to bring the mold and deckle that my dad makes. If you check my other handmade paper making videos, I actually sell a handmade paper making kit. Production's been on hold because I'm still figuring out the shipping and stuff here. But do come back and check it out when it's available in my shop, because I guarantee you the quality and workmanship of the mold and deckle that my dad makes is just superb. After unscrewing the mold and deckle apart, now it's time to prepare the couching sheet. Others say couching, but others say couching, and I'm gonna stick with couching sheet. For my couching sheet, I'm just upcycling a very old pillowcase. So I cut the pillowcase into 4 equal pieces, and basically each couching sheet can hold 2 sheets of paper laid flat. So for one pillowcase, I was able to make 4 couching sheets. This pillowcase is polyester and cotton, so in my experience, you can use whatever fabric as your couching sheet. But in my experience, before I made a big batch of couching sheets, I make sure to try it out first, just so I know how the pulp will grab onto the sheet before I actually spend a large chunk of time and money preparing a big batch of fabric that won't efficiently work with the pulp. Now it's time to set up the workstation. So for my workstation, I always have a tray underneath my couching sheet setup. It's there to catch water, and I sandwich a towel between the couching sheet and the tray to catch more water. Then I have a bunch of sponge sheets, and then I have the hanger just sitting all to my right, and I have another tray that catches the water from the sponge as well. When your workstation's all set up, it's time for pulp preparation. So simply tear your sheets into smaller bits and run it through the blender. It's as easy as that. If you don't have a blender, you can do it manually. I have a video for other alternative options that you can use, but in this video, I'm using this hand blender. So unlike the bigger blender where you can just dump everything in, I made my pulp in 2 smaller batches. But the thing about using a hand blender is it pulverizes the paper quickly, so it's not that bad. I always get asked why my handmade papers come out bright, while others who try handmade paper making get a gray or a darker result. Remember, if your paper has ink on it, that ink will affect the color of your pulp. So try using paper that has heavy print on it, or just use paper without print at all. So let me show you the difference. So this is the pulp with paper that has no ink on it. It has that cream color, whereas this is the paper that had print on it and it has like a grayer tone. So as you can see, I have the gray and the cream colored pulp, and I'm just mixing them together so I get a lighter cool tone. So off camera, I added water to this tub of pulp. Now it's time to discuss the additives. This is the most fun part of the whole process because you get to experiment with what you want to add onto the paper. But again, I would like to emphasize on the word experiment. Now, when it comes to using gold foil, I always reach for the sheet type, not the pre-crinkled type or the ones that come in like a shaker where you just sprinkle them all out. Why? Because they get pulverized to a point where the foil sheets won't be visible on the final paper. So I don't agitate, but I would rather snip it into large chunks using a scissor. I've tried other methods before, but this one yields the results that I want for the final look of my paper. As for adding flower petals, this one's a bit tricky. As I've mentioned, it's always an experiment, especially if you're working with flower petals or plant material, because there is a big chance that your flower or your plant material will stain or bleed color onto your sheet. And spoiler alert, this tulip petal actually bled, but surprisingly not in the way that I thought it would. So it's important to know the flowers or the leaves around your area and identify the ones that do not bleed. If you were to purchase anything, I would recommend you purchase and use dried hydrangeas, because so far I haven't had any bleeding issues when I used them in the past. Anyway, now it's time for couching. So when you have all your additives in place, just agitate the water and make sure that the pulp and all the other bits that you added in are all suspended on the water and they're not at the bottom. So basically you hold your Mould and Deckle in place and then just dip it into the bath and pull out pulp. As I've mentioned earlier, I had an issue with this Mould and Deckle set from Temu because it has like a dip where the paper goes. As you can see, the pulp is sort of like buried in that 1mm dip of the wood edges, which made it more difficult to do the transfer because the edges were difficult to push from the back. It was more difficult, less efficient, but not impossible, so I was still able to make a couple of sheets. So as you can see, I just turned over the frame onto the couching sheet and lifted it up. Anyway, I'm going to demonstrate that again with the second sheet. So again, just dip and then pull up with a layer of pulp onto your Mould and Deckle. Then just turn over and transfer the pulp onto the couching sheet. Squeeze the water out from the back of the screen. I'm using this sponge sheet and I'm just repeatedly pressing it against the screen. Then I lift the screen to release the sheet. To dry the sheets, I basically run the rod of the hanger underneath the couching sheet, and when you reach midway, pull it up and it should hang this way as you can see on screen. Here's the whole motion from another angle. So just slide the rod and then pull up. And then you just leave them out to dry. So one of my issues here in the UK was the weather. I wasn't sure how long it'll take to dry. So I just placed it in front of the heater and hopefully I'll run it for a couple of minutes and this will help the sheets dry faster. I actually left it to air dry, but it didn't quite do the trick. It was dry, but still a little bit damp. So this is what I mentioned earlier, that it had that bleeding, and it was amazing because I was expecting a bleeding that was of the purple kind, but rather it was like a neon yellow haze sort of bleed, which I'm honestly not too miffed about. I pressed the sheets under the weight of the toolbox for a bit just to straighten them out. To conclude, I think they turned out pretty decent, but I have honestly made prettier sheets than this one. Check out all my other videos if you want to see what I mean. I asked my dad to make a bunch of Mould and Deckles, which he will be shipping out to me here in the UK because this Mould and Deckle from Temu just doesn't work for me. But until that comes through, I'll be trying a different alternative Mould and Deckle for my next paper making video. I'll see you then. Bye!